right, welcome back to the Kirby on Sports podcast. Big thanks to our sponsors. As always, Regroup Building Services, PM Plus Reserves, Shenandoah Primitives in Chief Graphics. We're pleased to welcome onto the show now Tarik El-Bashir from The Athletic, formerly with NBC Sports Washington as well. Tarik, good to see you, sir. How you been?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah, man. It's a pleasure getting you on. I know back in the day we met in early 2017, and I followed your work, and it's great to get to reconnect with you and everything, even with your new career path with The Athletic.
Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting past 7 or 8 years. I mean, I've gone from the Washington Post, dabbled in some TV with NBC Sports Washington, and then came back to my roots, which is primarily writing at The Athletic. I've enjoyed it, but I at the end of the day, I do feel like writing is my calling, and just really glad to be doing it again and doing it at a great company like The Athletic.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I mean, The Athletic is pretty new and everything, but when it first started rolling out, from what I could tell, it's subscription based correct me if I'm wrong on this, it's sports writing, or is there other news aspects involved with The Athletic?
No, it's all sports.
All sports.
It's completely subscription based. Yep.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about what sets The Athletic aside from other blogs, newspaper articles that people can access for free?
Yeah, I mean, for one, many of the reporters who are covering your favorite teams are veteran reporters who already have contacts within those teams. So you're getting the best coverage, right? You're not getting fluff. You're not getting filler. You're getting hardcore, like, inside intelligence. I mean, I look at just my colleagues in the NHL group. Now we cover all the sports. We've even branched out into England and we cover the Premier League now. But just looking at my NHL cohort, I mean, these guys are people I grew up in the sports writing business with. I mean, you look at every single city just about. I can look at a former grizzled newspaper veteran who's covered his team for a long time. So you're getting coverage that you're not going to get from many other places. It's well sourced. It's if you use our app or even you go to our website, there's no ads. I mean, it's great. It's to me, the freedom to tell stories in an in-depth way and use advanced analytics and kind of really stretch your legs on a piece is really what sets The Athletic apart. I mean, just go look at our comments on our stories. I mean, it's not like, oh, that was it. It's, oh my God, that was so illuminating. Oh my God, that was so awesome. Straight across the board. So it's worth your money, and keep your eye out for a deal. There's always a subscription deal out there.
I see that as well. And I've done the free trial and look through articles, but I never push the trigger because I just keep looking at it and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and push the trigger. Yeah, no, but the thing is, then I get sidetracked and and then next time I'm like, oh, I forgot it. But definitely now I'm going to pull the trigger. Don't you worry. But what sort of pathway opened up for you to take this job at The Athletic? Can you go a little bit into that?
Yeah. So I was working for NBC Sports Washington. I joined that company covering football, toggled over to hockey. Now I covered hockey in DC, the Capitals, for the Washington Post from 2005 to 2011. So I was already familiar with the beat. Went back to covering hockey, covered them through the championship for NBC Sports Washington. And then I got a phone call from an old friend of mine who had been in newspapers for a long time and was now in a managerial position at The Athletic, and they were looking to make some moves in Washington and hire some veteran reporters. And I was coming available contractually, and so I listened and I initially joined The Athletic to cover football again, to go back to covering the Washington football team. And within a year was back doing what I love, which is covering hockey. So it's really worked out for the best.
So is The Athletic like sort of working for The Athletic and working like for a newspaper or something? Is it basically the same stuff on how you get stories, interview wise, and everything like that, or are there some differences on what you do, since it seems like you have more freedom with The Athletic and what you talk about?
It's very similar. I mean, totally independent news source. I mean, it's very similar to working for the Washington Post or the New York Times, which I also worked for back in the late 1990s. When I worked for NBC Sports Washington, it was a little different because there was a connection between the team and the outlet. Here, no connection. It's just like working for a newspaper covering the beat on a daily basis. The difference is, I don't have to feel like I have to produce something every single day, like here's what's going on today, here's what's going on tomorrow. I can take a step back and look at the bigger picture and write a more in-depth piece that'll give fans and observers a deeper understanding of what's actually going on. Why is this team losing? As opposed to the incremental coverage of, every single day writing. I can take 3 or 4 days and write a bigger piece trying to explain, why is this team losing? Why is this team winning? Why did the team make a change at coach? So that's the more in-depth part that I was talking about, and that's what I really enjoy.
That's awesome. Great insight on The Athletic. Once again, we're joined by Tarik El-Bashir. Tarik, obviously with COVID and everything, we all know the situation with this pandemic. We've been going through this pandemic for just about a year. Yeah. What's it been like for you covering you cover the Capitals, obviously. What's it been like covering this team through COVID? What has been challenging for you so far?
Well, I would say the most challenging part is just the lack of face-to-face interaction with the people you're covering. Now, we've gotten pretty good at doing Zoom, like we're doing right now. I mean, we've gotten pretty good at that, and it was a big adjustment. So that's the biggest thing, is not being in the locker room. I mean, being a veteran reporter of, almost 2 decades, and a lot of times when you're covering a morning skate or a practice or a game, you can really kind of, pull up to a player's locker that you've got a relationship with. He trusts you, you trust him. There's a strong relationship there. They know that I'm going to be fair with them, and I can get some good information out of them, without 2 other cameras and 3 other reporters from other outlets being there. Now everything is kind of, I shouldn't say everything, but many of the media sessions are shared, with other media members. Now, the cool thing is the Capitals have been very good, if you need someone individually, setting up phone calls and also setting up one-on-one Zoom calls with players and coaches and whoever else you need to talk to. But, just being around sometimes, Josh, just being around and seeing what's happening in the locker room, seeing body language, seeing people interact with one another, that kind of little bit of detail gets lost a little bit. I would say at first it was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How do you report on something you can't actually see at the moment? You can't be in the room. And what we found, at the Athletic and other places is you can still write really good articles. You just got to do it maybe a little bit differently. Instead of, using, flowery language to explain something that you're seeing, now you're maybe peeling back the layers by looking at advanced analytics, or you're talking to people outside of the organization a little bit more rather than the players who are directly involved. And sometimes that leads to better stories and more complete stories. So it was definitely an adjustment, I would say, but a year or so now into this, I feel like most people have kind of figured out a way to get the job done, even if it's a little bit different than before.
So are you going to the stadium during home games and covering the team, or how does that work with COVID?
Yeah, so for the Capitals, you actually can go to Capital One Arena. You just let the team know that you're coming. And so instead of sitting in the press box, they put reporters in suites, luxury suites, because, of course, the building is empty right now. There are no fans there. So we get our own luxury suite. You get your own leather chairs. There's usually a diet soda in the fridge. You got your own private bathroom.
Oh,
And,
wow.
you're down a level, too. You're in the 100 level as opposed to above the 300s, kind of in that 400 level. So you got a really good view. So I've gone to a couple. What has happened here over the pandemic is I have really figured out a way to kind of do it better from home. I know you can't see it right now because I have a background of MedStar Capitals Iceplex, but if you were able to see like where I'm sitting right now in my office, I've got a 55-inch monitor on the wall where I'm watching the Capitals game with Joe B and Locker, the home feed. On my laptop, which I'm talking to you on right now, I will have the visiting feed where I'm listening to what the broadcasters from the other team are saying, which is always very helpful. And sometimes you're even getting a different view with different cameras. And then and I have two big monitors on my desk, which have live feed of the game, with stats and other things. So honestly, you get a better view at home. There are some things you miss. You don't get to see warm-ups. You don't get to see if someone gets hurt. You kind of got to rely on the broadcast for that. But otherwise, I've kind of figured out a nice little system here at home. And it makes me a little more efficient filing my stories afterwards, instead of, covering the game and then doing the interviews on Zoom and then racing home for 45 minutes and then starting to write it, 11:30 at night. I'm already at home. My story's done at 11:30. So it's up sooner so fans can read it and start interacting in the comments. I probably will if I had to guess, half of the home games this year. Especially the afternoon games are great because obviously there's, I can get home and still get up a story by dinner time. But we're not traveling right now. It just makes common sense because, we're still in the global pandemic. There's really no need to put yourself at risk. I haven't had COVID yet, and I'm trying to avoid having it. So, I'm also looking out for my own health and, and for my family. So, it's been a wild ride, man. But like I said, we're a year into it now, and I feel like I've gotten a better feel for how to do it without, the way it was before, differently. And I think most people in the business have done the same.
Well, it sounds like with that setup, we could give you a headset and you can start calling a game.
I have tried. I've never tried play-by-play, but I've tried color analyst, and it's hard, man.
Oh, yeah.
It's really hard. Even if you've done your homework, it's hard. Just keeping up with the action, especially in hockey, how fast it is. I'm telling you, when I'm at home and I got the game on the monitor, and I'm constantly going back to see something. I'm constantly rolling it back. You can't do that when you're calling the game to the people at home. Yeah, it's funny. Every once in a while, I've wondered what would have happened. When I was at college, when I was in college at Howard University, I started out in broadcast journalism and switched over to print journalism. I wonder if I had stayed in broadcast, if I would have become like a play-by-play or color analyst. I might have.
Wow.
But I took a turn towards sports writing and don't regret it.
Great insight there. So you mentioned earlier that you've been to like half the games. It must be weird for you just watching this team with no fans in the stands. You must get some sort of different perspective because of the fact you can probably hear some of the chirping going on.
Some of the chirping, you hear a lot of F-bombs. A lot of F-bombs. It's actually pretty funny. So you can't really make out like a full conversation, but you can definitely hear when Tom Wilson yells. And you can definitely hear when Alex Ovechkin, didn't like the pass that he just got, or he just got stripped to the puck and he just drops a long F and, has to turn back and go back check. You hear the referees yelling at the players, move it, telling them, get off the wall and move that puck. You can hear icing, you can hear everything. Because again, when you're there, you're down low, right? You're in the 100s now, and there's nobody there. I mean, where I sat, where I've been sitting, the television group folks are right in front of me, so I can hear Joe B and Locker a little bit. But for the most part, I'm hearing what's going on the ice. And honestly, if I would love to be a little bit closer just so I could hear all of the conversation. Like like you can hear every other word. I want to hear exactly what Tom Wilson is saying to the Islanders bench or to the Penguins bench. I bet that'd probably be a story in and of itself.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if you've witnessed a live fight this year. That's probably a lot different with no fans.
Well, the one thing you notice in momentum changing plays like a fight, there is someone who's hitting the button for the fake crowd noise, but it's not the same because, when there's fans in the building, everyone kind of you don't just hear it, but you feel it. Everyone stands up and starts leaning in to get a better view of the fight or what just happened, right? So it definitely feels weird. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'm ever going to get over being in an empty arena with tarps over the seats. The players have, I want to say, adjusted and kind of gotten used to it, but they really do feed off the energy of the home crowd cheering for them or the road crowd booing them and kind of agitating them. Not having that is definitely lost. I think even on television it feels weird, because all you're hearing is that fake kind of murmur buzz of the fake crowd. I would say the good news is, talking to industry sources, I mean, they're kind of hoping that, it's back to some semblance of normalcy, the start of next season. We have a long time until then. And as we've seen, a lot of stuff can change, but they're hopeful that the start of next year can be relatively normal.
Yeah, as the season is progressing, we have seen a lot of movement within the standings, obviously, and we've seen a couple teams, including the Capitals, with COVID violations and having to postpone games and stuff. I'm sure you were all in on that when Samsonov and Ovechkin, Orlov, and all of them violated the protocols and stuff. And then you also have the New Jersey Devils, a total of 19 players on the COVID list and postponed 7 total games. So from your perspective, how do you think the league has been handling COVID protocols and the postponement of games with this shortened season?
Well, I'll tell you, there was a time about 2 weeks ago when I feel like there were 4 or 5, the Capitals were just emerging from their COVID situation. And then there was like 4 or 5 other teams that were shut down. Oh. I was like, and for the first time, I was like, whoa, are they going to get this in? Like, is this going to work? I mean, I was looking at these games getting postponed day after day after day. And I was like, I was starting to kind of just do the math in my head. And I was like, are they going to put these on the back end? How are they going to do this? Is it a smart thing just to press the pause button so this outbreak doesn't get worse? And then someone in the business said, remember what happened to Major League Baseball when they started without a bubble? And there was that, was it the Marlins? There was like a, there was
the Marlins.
Outbreak. There was an outbreak right at the beginning, and there were question marks as to whether it was going to work out. And then slowly but surely, the outbreaks got smaller and smaller, and they started to get a hold of it. And they were able to get all the way through the World Series. I think that's what's going to happen here with the NHL. If you look at the COVID list, about a week and a half ago, there was like 50 guys on it, over like a dozen teams. Today, right before I got on this call with you, I took a quick look at today's COVID list, which is available on the internal media site. And it was like 17 players on a handful of teams. So clearly it's moving in the right direction. I mean, it's still bad, but it's, it's less than, it's about less than half of what it was just a week and a half ago. So they're moving in the right direction. I don't know if you saw yesterday, but the NHL put out an email with 29 rescheduled games. It really impacted the Capitals. They put in some new games. They moved some other games around. Some game times got changed. My opinion, the league has done a pretty good job, all things considered. I mean, this is uncharted territory for everybody. This is the first time hockey has dealt with a pandemic without a bubble. They figured it out in the summer. I think they knew they were going to face some challenges. They've tweaked the protocols as they've gone along. Like right now, it's really stringent, Josh. I don't think people out there realize, like, they have told players, when you are not at the rink, be at home. Like, stop going out. Tell your family, let's really stay at home as much as possible. You notice teams are practicing less. They're having fewer morning skates. They're doing everything they can to mitigate the possibility of another outbreak. So, the Caps so far this week, some of it is workload, but part of it, I think, is this new protocol. They didn't practice on Monday. They played on Tuesday. Today's Wednesday. They didn't practice. That's 2 days off in 3 days. I mean, some of it's workload, but some of it is they're trying to limit the amount of time these teams are together so they can get through the rest of the season.
So do you know of any sort of contingency plan if the COVID cannot be controlled and there are too many game postponements? Because as you know, we are in a shortened season. It's like 58 games, if I remember correctly.
56, yeah. 56,
yeah. With a game each night, essentially. So do you know if the NHL, like the NFL, potentially would have added in a week 18? Do you know if the NHL did anything like that just in case?
There is some cushion on the back end, yes.
Okay.
And if things really spiral out of control, there were some contingency plans for maybe going into a temporary bubble or trying to figure things out where they could just get back to playing in some form or fashion so they can keep moving forward. I really do, Josh, feel like they are going to get through this. Again, I'm way more bullish right now than I was a week and a half ago. But you look at the way the numbers have come down and the way the players and the teams, they were already taking it seriously. But I feel like everyone's on board now, even though the few stragglers who weren't totally on board with all the protocols, they're on board now because, getting through this season is linked to, their paychecks and also getting next year off on the right foot. I really do think they're going to get through this. I mean, even if they have to kind of just muddle their way through and keep postponing and moving games around, they're going to figure it out one way or another. And especially, I mean, I feel like once they got through the turbulence of the last couple of weeks and they've arrived to this moment, I mean, if they didn't shut it down 2 weeks ago, they're not going to do it in the future. They're just going to figure it out.
Yeah. I completely understand with that. I mean, it seems like they're doing well, but who knows with this virus, but I'm just hoping we get out of this virus soon. Once again, Tarik El-Bashir with The Athletic on the Kirby on Sports podcast. Let's go a little bit around the league now, Tarik. Obviously, let's start with the Capitals. The beginning of this season started off great. I mean, even when Ovechkin and the guys
6-0-3.
Yeah, a point every game. Even if they went into overtime. So that was great. It looked like a lot of the veterans stepped up well, but as of right now, as we're recording, they have dropped to 4th place with 17 points, a 7-4-3 record.
Yeah. Well, what I think happened was I think they were winning some games early that maybe they didn't deserve to win. And I think that kind of that plus the COVID list guys, plus injuries on top of that. Remember, not only were they dealing with 4 of their key players on the COVID list, they were also dealing with Eller was out, Schultz was out, Wilson was out for a bit, Verano was out. I mean, there was a time where they were like the Washington Hershey Bears. I mean, they had like 5 or 6 minor leaguers in the line, but they did the best they could. But let's be honest. I mean, there's a difference between a full-time NHL player and a guy who's in the minor leagues. I mean, at some point there's a drop-off, and those guys are just are not capable of sustaining the level of production that you need to compete at the NHL level. And I think that caught up with them a little bit. I mean, but also, Josh, if you take a big picture look, I mean, here's an irregular offseason. You hired a new coach. I mean, Peter Laviolette was meeting guys for the first time on January 3rd. I mean, these guys, because of COVID, they were having Zoom calls, but they weren't having face-to-face meetings. So like some of the just, hey, how's it going? Hey, you want to grab a coffee and talk about what you're going to do this season? And none of that stuff was really happening. So, in addition to the COVID list and the injuries, they had a new coach trying to install a new system and a new culture and a new, and all these new things. They were facing a lot of adversity early on. And I think that led to the 4-game losing streak, which they just broke the other night against the Penguins. I do feel like they've got it pointed in the right direction. I would say, so now they're a quarter way through the season, 14 games, a 56-game schedule. I think after 28 games, when we're at the halfway point, we're going to have a really good feel for what this team is what it still needs, what it does well, what are the weaknesses. About a month from now, we're going to have a really good feel for whether this team is the real deal and is going to be able to capitalize and maybe make a deep run.
So the goalie situation, as you know, Braden Holtby left, obviously due to contract reasons, too much money, was my understanding from the whole thing. But you got Vitek Vanacek and Samsonov, and my thought going into the beginning of the season is like, oh, we're going to have young goalies. A lot of teams are going to score on us. But with Samsonov going out with COVID, Vitek looked pretty good. And then you have Anderson that filled in for Vitek against the Penguins. I mean, not so great of a game there, but what has your analysis been on the goalies for the Capitals? Obviously stepping up and looking pretty good through some portions of games.
Yeah, the one name you didn't throw in there was Henrik Lundqvist. I mean, they went out and signed, a veteran goaltender that they were hoping. I mean, when this team was put together by Brian McClellan, the idea was it was Henrik Lundqvist fighting with Ilya Samsonov for the starting role, right? Those guys were going to push each other. The 39-year-old future Hall of Famer and the 23-year-old second-year player who had a pretty good rookie season. Vitek Vanacek was going to be the number 3 goaltender. So it didn't work out that way, of course. Lundqvist had the heart issue and eventually needed surgery. It looks like he's out for the year. I'm never going to count him totally out, but it does not look like he's going to be playing anytime soon. Samsonov stepped into that number 1 role, immediately got COVID. He was also recovering from an injury they suffered falling from an ATV in the summer. He's had a rough go of it here, an injury and then COVID. And then you've got your number 3 goaltender, Vitek Vanacek stepping in. And, here's a guy who's been in the AHL for 4.5 years. You're kind of just patiently waiting for his turn. And I feel like I've got a pretty good feel for him now after 11 starts. He's done pretty well. I mean, he's really done pretty well. He clearly has some rough edges and some things that need to be cleaned up. But to me, he looks like an undersized guy who fights really hard. He's a great story of perseverance. He's waited for this opportunity for a long time, and he's really kind of taken it and run with it. The big thing to me was after that 4-game losing streak. A couple games there, he wasn't so great, and the true mark of a goaltender who can stick around the NHL for a long time is mental toughness. Being able to push aside those losses and maybe a couple of games where he didn't play his best, and he did the other night when he beat the Penguins. That was one of his best games of the year, and for him to be able to bounce back, people were starting to talk on the internet. There was a little pressure on social media. Maybe Vitek can't get the job done. Maybe the Caps need to trade for a goalie. He had all this outside noise. He was able to push that aside, and he got the job done. I think he's done a pretty good job. I think the question is going to be, when can Samsonov get back in there, and what does he look like? If Samsonov comes back in and shows he can be the goalie he was early last season when he was a really, really good player as a rookie, and then you put Vitek back as the number 2, I think the goaltending situation is maybe, something that they can deal with. If Vitek is still kind of up and down, and Samsonov, you still don't really know what you got there, okay, you would get close to the trade deadline. Maybe you want to go out and make a move. But for right now, it's they're going to stick with these 2 young goaltenders, and I think that's the right move. Yeah,
and my fault for forgetting about Henrik Lundqvist, but I saw a video either yesterday or earlier today as we are recording, a video of him actually running. So it looks like it looks like he's making progress. But I mean, literally, what a heartbreaker it was for him to sign with the Capitals and end up like getting heart surgery. That's something that obviously it's something that he needed to do, and I'm just glad it looks like he's recuperating and feeling better.
I think you're looking at the right way, Josh. When he changed teams, and we've seen this a number of times here in the last few years, you got to get a pretty good physical when you change teams. The new team wants to know everything about you, wants to know your history. And I think that when he had a heart issue that he had managed for most of his career, into Washington, saw some new doctors. Some new doctors were like, oh, something doesn't feel right here. Why don't you go see a specialist? And they kept pushing him to go see, to go explore this further and further. And they found out that there was a ticking time bomb there. There was a problem that needed to be fixed, or it could have had some really bad consequences. And so I'm glad that, the Caps pushed him to, keep getting those tests, and they were able to find, what was wrong. And he had that surgery. And, like you said, he had that video on Instagram of him jogging in looked like maybe the East Park of New York City. Looks like he's doing well. And that was great to see. Again, going from heart surgery to playing in the NHL in the same year, that's a bridge a little too far for me right now. But I'm just happy that he's healthy and seems to be on the path to a full recovery.
Absolutely. So looking at the NHL standings, you see sort of a big picture look out of the standings so far. Who have you been most impressed with? Any other NHL teams you're eyeing? I know it's still pretty early, but who have you been looking at?
Boston, they look really good. They lost Torrey Krug, they lost Zdeno Chara. Everyone kind of had question marks. Pastrnak was coming off off-season surgery. They've looked really good. I mean, they're in my opinion, the East Division, the Capitals division, is probably the deepest, and kind of they're going to kind of beat each other up. Boston's been the class of that division so far. I mean, right now, like you said, Boston's got 22. The Islanders have 19 points. Philly 18, Washington 17, Pittsburgh 15. That's 5 teams that are right in the thick of it. And and we're not counting out the Devils, although I think the Devils it's going to be a uphill battle for them. That's 5 teams fighting for 4 spots to get into the playoffs. So that's going to be chaos going down the stretch. It's going to be a lot of fun. Toronto, in my opinion, the cool thing about being at home for a lot of these games, I get to watch a lot more around the league. Toronto, in my opinion, has probably been the best team that I've seen. That said, they're also playing in kind of a division that doesn't care a whole lot about defense, that all-Canadian division, but they've looked really good. Tampa Bay has looked really good. Florida, I know, is in first place by a point. They're a little bit of a dark horse, in my opinion, but I think Tampa, the reigning champions, I'm not counting them out. I haven't seen a whole lot of the West divisions because those are the late games. It's usually when I'm writing my stories, but I have seen Vegas play a couple of times. They've been good the last couple of years, and remember the Caps beat them in the Stanley Cup final in 2018. That's a good core. That's a good group, and I'm not going to count out St. Louis either. The one thing, I've covered this league on and off, since the late 1990s, and what we've seen since the salary cap was implemented. It took a little while, but the parity, man. I mean, the teams. There are so many teams in any given year that are going to be right in it, and I feel like that's even been more pronounced the last few years. You get close to the trade deadline, and man, there's teams that are still just kind of fighting for a couple points to get back into the race. There's so many teams that are competing for a playoff spot. There's very few that are just out there going, yeah, this isn't our year. We're going to sell some players and flip them for prospects. It's a lot of teams are looking to buy. It's a really competitive league. It's really hard to win. The East Division, it's really hard to win. I think about a month and a half from now, hockey fans are going to have a lot of fun kind of tracking the standings.
Oh yeah, as you mentioned, it's still pretty early. One team I want to point out, the Tampa Bay Lightning, obviously top of their division, and I think they're going to get a little bit better now that Steven Stamkos has been removed from the COVID list, and I believe that was today or yesterday that was announced. So,
man, that lineup is so deep. I mean, and remember, he didn't even play for most of the playoffs last year when they won the Stanley Cup. And that's a former 60-goal scorer, the captain of the team, and he was sidelined by an injury when they won the Stanley Cup. When he's back in there with Victor Hedman and Andrei Vasilevsky in goal, and John Cooper's a great coach, that's a really, really good team. I wouldn't say they're the odds-on favorite, in my opinion, to win. I've had Vegas is just kind of – it's a team that I've just been watching. Vegas and Toronto, those are 2 teams that I think are going to be there till the end. And look, I'm not counting out Washington either. I mean, they've had some ups and downs here, but they've got a head coach in Peter Laviolette who's, been able to maximize teams in his first year, especially veteran-laden groups. I think these guys, once it gets to crunch time, they're going to flip a switch and they're going to be a tough out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I mean, it looks like there's still a lot of hockey to be played. It's great for hockey fans because there's a game on essentially every night. And that's what's really great about it. And I see, and I'm like, wow, there's a hockey game and you get to see all the action. It's sort of different though. I mean, I have to say, watching on TV, I still see the differences from there being fans to no fans. So, I mean, hopefully we can get through this and we can see a live hockey game with fans, because that's the most electric atmosphere ever.
Yeah, I am totally on board, man. I really hope that, come September, October, where, we're in a place as a country and as a world where, people can start getting back together in big groups and, go take in a concert or a hockey game or go to a restaurant and not have to worry about, catching an infectious disease.
Absolutely. Tarik, one last thing to wrap this up. Remind me again, were you covering the Capitals the year they won the Stanley Cup?
Yes,
you were
through. I was on the ice when they were passing the Stanley Cup around.
Oh yeah,
I was in MGM casino when Ovi came through with the cup. With all of his teammates before they went to the nightclub. I covered every single game of that run. I covered that entire season. Still to this day, probably the most fun I've had as a sports journalist. You become partial to the people you cover, especially over a number of years. You see them trying to accomplish something. You're telling their story, good, bad, ugly, whatever, and it was just really cool to I was doing the, online and sideline reporting for NBC Sports Washington. So, I was around the team twice a day, every day, and to, see them win the championship. That was just a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but it was a ton of fun.
So out of that championship run, what was one of the best moments out of that championship run, in your opinion?
Best moments. Oh, I mean, without a doubt, it was beating the Penguins in Game 6. It was Kuznetsov's breakaway goal. Ovi picks off a pass, comes up the middle, feeds the puck to Kuznetsov. This is the team that they just couldn't get past, right? They couldn't beat the Penguins. That was the reason that they hadn't played for a Stanley Cup before. I mean, every single time they get knocked out by the Penguins went on and won the Stanley Cup. And, watching Kuznetsov make that move and put it right between Murray's pads, I mean, that was a really, really cool moment. Because I don't want to say that I knew at that moment they were going to win the Stanley Cup, because they still had to go and beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in 7 games. But I knew that, like, the biggest hurdle had been cleared, like you had finally slayed the dragon. You had finally, freed yourself of the team that, had just held you down for so long. And that Penguin series was pretty cool. The Lightning series was cool. And the Vegas series, I just felt like that was really fast. 5 games, after that first game, it just felt like the Capitals were in control. And what that run should remind everyone of is, the regular season, you got to get into the playoffs. But once you get there, that's when you got to be playing your best hockey. That's when you got to really pay attention to how things are lining up. Because remember, they went down 0-2 to Columbus in that first series. I mean, they were a overtime goal away from, getting bounced pretty much, right? And then they turned it around and they caught lightning in a bottle and went to the championship. It was pretty awesome.
Absolutely. That's great insight there. Once again, Tarik El-Bashir of The Athletic. You can catch him on Twitter at Tarik_El-Bashir. Tarik, appreciate the time coming on the podcast. Hope you and your family continue to stay safe, buddy. Thank you. You too. The Kirby on Sports podcast will continue right after this.